So welcome back to Untermyer Gardens. We've had a few hard frosts and a decent freeze, and our herbaceous plants are looking a little bit tattered, so we'll take a few moments today and look at conifers throughout the garden. I'm standing here on the Vista, which is lined by a plant called Cryptomeria japonica radicans. This cultivar is especially interesting because it's wind resistant and disease resistant, has a little less browning than other Cryptomeria cultivars on the interior, which if you've grown Yoshina or the straight species, you'll know that's a bit of a problem. And it has a bit more of an emerald green color. And so this monoculture is sitting next to all the wind that comes off the Hudson River. We've been really pleased how these have performed in the last 5 years. They went on as about 10 to 12 feet specimen, and they've already doubled that size. They'll get up to about 35 to 40 feet with a 10-foot spread. So a nice tight columnar plant that can be used in many places in the garden. So while we're talking about conifers today, most people wouldn't think this particular plant belongs in the group. Although it is one of the most evolved conifers, just before plants started to flower, it's Ginkgo biloba. It gets that name from its bilobed, two-lobed leaf. We usually grow this plant for its great fall color, amongst other really interesting reasons. We're a little bit early this season for the fall color. It'll get a golden yellow and drop all in one day. But interestingly, it is one of 5 deciduous conifers and the only broadleaf amongst the bunch. So one of the first borders that greets you when you visit Untermyer Gardens is here along our picnic rock. This particular plant is sort of the star of this border. It's a Cryptomeria japonica black dragon, a bit unusual and has a very dwarf habit to it. It'll get to about 3 or 4 times as tall as it is right now, but just a little bit wider, a really interesting punctuation mark in the garden. Behind me is a plant that I can't use enough, and it's fairly ubiquitous but worth growing, is a Chamaecyparus NOOTKATENSIS Pendula GLAUCA. And stepping down to the other side of the scale in this border is Juniper SQUAMATA blue star, grown for its foliage color and the texture. You can find this at any nursery, and it provides a really great evergreen ground cover. So running around my feet here is the Juniperus SQUAMATA blue star again. Again, these will spread out and form a bit of a ground cover, and we have them combined with some yellow foliage plants to really give some contrast in foliage color. But why I did step in this border is behind me is this Juniper communis gold cone. When I started researching this, I think this plant was only described as getting 5 to 6 feet tall. And I went out and found in the nursery one that's almost double that at the point. It's here in the Rock and Stream Garden, which is sort of a casual naturalistic planting. And to have this columnar tight element in the middle of it is kind of fun and provides an interesting contrast. This plant, its spring growth emerges yellow and holds that yellow color through most of the summer. So it is a bit more dynamic than a lot of your other junipers. So here I'm standing in a bed adjacent to the Temple of Love with its big rocks and waterfalls, and we planted a conifer bed here kind of reminiscent of water coming down the hill. I'm standing in the middle of the stream in front of a Microbiota, DECUSSATA. Some people call it the Russian arborvitae. It has a great texture and foliage, and after we get a few more hard frosts and even some freezing, the foliage will go a nice tawny purple, reddish purple, which is a lot of fun. And that is flanked on either side by some junipers. Here we have a Juniperus virginiana gray owl. You can see why it's named gray owl, for that blue-gray foliage and a bit more rougher texture than the Microbiota. And then stepping across to the other side of the stream, we have a Juniperus chinenesis, and it's one called gold lace for those golden tips. So for just a bunch of low-growing conifers, it's interesting texture and interesting color. We've thrown a Spiraea Ogon in for some more texture and color here and there. And this little cherry border, ornamental cherry border, is becoming quite a prized little spot in the garden, I think. So as I was looking around for conifers throughout the garden, I came upon our weeping bald cypress. This is Taxodium falling water. It's another one of our deciduous conifers. But what really steals the show in this area of the border is this purple beautyberry. It's a cultivar called Callicarpa dichotoma Pearl Glam. And the berries alone are worth growing it for, but it also has this purple foliage from spring all the way until we have another couple hard frosts. I would have grown this plant regardless just for those berries, but to have that foliage carry through the season is just another reason to grow this particular Callicarpa. So to wrap up our conifer walk, I'm standing here next to this weeping larch, a weeping Larix, another one of our deciduous conifers. So there's 5 total. We've talked about a few today. Next year there's going to be a pop quiz. But I'd like to finish the day by standing here in our cascade beds, which in addition to a handful of dwarf conifers we have around, there's a lot of different grasses we're growing in here. I'm standing in front of a Pennisetum. We have Calamagrostis Karl Foerster, which I think is a super strong plant in almost any garden. And just the end of our asters is showing with this aster Jindai. It's an Asian aster. It gets a really great height to it in the border and has the most persistent color of any of the other ones we're growing right now.